after Jeff Gordon speaks, we're going to have our awards presentation. So please stick around. And one of the interesting parts of the day will be recognizing some outstanding innovative thought. And speaking of innovative thought, I'd like to introduce our next keynote speaker. He is President and CEO of Syniverse. He joined the company as Chief Technology Officer and was most recently the company's Chief Operating Officer. In these positions, he was responsible for product realization, research and development, and the company's global technology operations on 5 continents. Past experience includes positions with Bell Atlantic and IBM, someone who's been in and around and part of the wireless industry for some time. Let us please welcome Jeff Gordon. Jeff.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome everybody. What we're going to talk about today is maximizing the customer experience. And one of the things that we wanted to do is, you've heard already today how quickly we're advancing the state of the technology. And we wanted to talk and share with you some thoughts about what are the implications longer term. Because as we continue to develop, as we've continued to develop from 1G to 2G to 3G, and now we're talking about really global 4G and LTE deployments, the great thing is our customers are experiencing new things that they can do with their mobile device. And they're using it, it's becoming a real-time tool for their lifestyle in every respect. They're doing mobile banking, for example, all over the world now. Mobile commerce all over the world now. And increasingly, things like mobile navigation. I can't walk around the block anymore without my device. Half the time when I navigate in my car, I'm using my mobile device instead of my GPS in the car because they're basically unusable. In fact, I read an article recently from the LA Times that just talked about the creativity that people have in terms of using these devices. And I think it's safe to say that some of their use of these devices goes well beyond our imagination. 12% of Americans recently in that survey said that they use their phone in the shower. I'm trying to think, how do you use your phone in the shower? This is even more startling. 10% of Americans admit to using their mobile device during sex. And I'm not exactly sure how you do that, so if anybody has any ideas, that's kind of a curious thought to me. But having been in this industry since the early days and really deploying 2G networks, the thing that dawned on me is, while we're giving our customers more and more technology and faster networks, and they're becoming more and more engaged in real time with their mobile device, how are we as operators really serving them? And I would assert that how we as operators serve our customers is kind of stuck somewhat in that 2G paradigm. So while the networks have sort of taken off exponentially and bandwidths are taking off exponentially, we would assert that it's time for operators to start thinking about reclassing and rethinking the whole customer experience. So I'll give you an example. If I land today, with most operators, if I'm roaming and I land in Paris, or if I just am traveling in the US and I have a problem roaming, right, my device doesn't work. It's up to me to try to chase down my carrier and figure out why it doesn't work. I might spend hours figuring out how to diagnose that. The carrier is losing money. I'm losing patience as a subscriber. And time is wasting away. And yet, the carrier, in many cases, you have this information and you know that. Don't you think it's time for us to maybe start getting a little more proactive? And that's one of the things that Syniverse has been thinking about, is how do we do a better job of real-time enabling our businesses so that we're supporting our customers as aggressively and as in real time as possible, just like they're using their devices in real time. So we thought we'd talk about that in a little more detail today. You know, another aspect when you start thinking about how customers view the device and the mobile network, a few years ago, I was using the device, you know, basically you're making phone calls, right? Then you get to the point where you're texting. Now I think most customers that use smartphones, they're really engaged at the application level, right? So they're not necessarily thinking about talking anymore. They're thinking about the thousands and thousands of applications that they're using every day. And yet, when I go around the globe and interact with our operators that we support, so many still, if you go into the NOC, we're worried about what's happening at the physical level, the transport layer, the data link level, layer 4 and below. And if we're providing you connectivity, then everything's good. And that may not necessarily be the case. From an end user experience point of view, their experience is really a 7-layer problem. And yet, most operators today still view that the job is to kind of manage the network. And there's more to the network than just the infrastructure itself. That's obviously a critical ingredient, but it's not sufficient to deliver an optimal customer experience. And our assertion is that operators that start rethinking how they go about enabling world-class customer experience, those are going to be the winners. And we heard Neville earlier mention this whole notion of the uncarrier. And from our perspective, our view is you might want to just think about reimagining what the service provider's role in the ecosystem is. That building the network is absolutely essential, and operating the network is absolutely essential. Getting the handsets right, getting the spectrum right, all of that is absolutely essential. But is that enough to ensure your long-term success, and is that enough to ensure optimal customer experience? And our belief, the answer to that is probably not. So what are the things that you might want to think about doing? One is think about delivering a proactive, real-time service environment. So let me take you to the example I talked about earlier. We have solutions today that if I land in Paris, before the customer even sees the phone light up, we know that they have failed to properly get access to the roaming network. Okay? And furthermore, it doesn't take too much effort to figure out why that is. HLR improperly provisioned, the customer doesn't have the right roaming plan. We may have a problem with one of the peering partners not being able to deliver service at this time. And so the alternative is for us to grab that information, diagnose it, and fix it. So when I'm that customer and I turn my phone on when I land, a few minutes goes by, but it lights up, and when it lights up, it works. So getting out and using the information that's flowing into the network today, correlating that information, and thinking about how we can affect outcomes for that customer right now. Not next week, not next month, but right now. How can we affect the outcome of the transaction? And I will tell you that we have over 100 customers today around the world that are using capabilities like this just by capturing the data you have right now and thinking about how to real-time enable it and direct it to your individual subscriber. The other example in terms of transformation is to think about owning the whole experience, and we'll go through that in a little more detail here in a moment. Another aspect is to rethink who your customer is. So today, the mobile ecosystem has gotten much more complex, and a lot of operators that I speak with around the world talk about new entrants into the ecosystem, taking away bandwidth, taking away messaging volumes, taking away a lot of things, when in reality, we believe that there's an opportunity to reframe who your customer is. So perhaps in the going forward scenario, subscribers are not only your customers, but perhaps other players in the ecosystem can become your customers as well. And we'll cite a few examples here. And we think a lot of this all kind of comes down to how do you leverage your data in real time? How do you do that for the benefit of your customer? And how do you monetize it? And we think there are ways for you to do that. I'll give you one example here. So let's say we have a customer who's a high-value customer. Perhaps they're using a debit card and they're roaming. And they're ready to make a transaction, to buy something somewhere out of their normal home territory. Well, what we're able to do in cooperation with the operator is figure out where that customer is right now. Not only if they're on your network, but if they're on one of your hundreds of partner networks around the world, to figure out where they are right now, like as in 100 milliseconds, fast enough that you could provide that information back to the bank that's authorizing it, for example, who would be willing to pay you potentially for utilizing that transaction, assuming your customers have opted in, and be able to authorize that transaction. And you say, well, from a customer point of view, why would you want to do that? Well, if you're using that debit card, I think you'd much rather have that fraud protection in place than to come home and find out that somebody else had taken your debit card and taken $5,000 out of your bank account, right? And you might be able to scratch and claw and get it back someday. But the fact is, you have two major problems today when you're using debit cards and credit cards transactionally. One is the potential use of fraud that impacts your bank account from a debit point of view. And then the other is the legitimate user who gets their card turned off, for example, when they're traveling around the world, right? So with these kind of capabilities, you end up with a three-way win. The customer gets a safer, more secure transaction, and it always works. No matter where I go in the world, if I've got my mobile device with me and I decide to do a transaction in Thailand, for example, it's going to get authorized because you have an additional measure to say, well, we know who owns that mobile device and we know where that mobile device is. So you put that together with the normal authorization mechanisms and everything works, right? So in that case, the customer ends up benefiting. Obviously, the financial institution ends up benefiting, and the operator ends up benefiting. So this whole notion of thinking about what data you have and how do you utilize it, correlate it in real time, and use that to drive a better customer experience. Now, obviously, to do that, there's a lot of sophistication there. You have to have a partner that understands all the privacy laws, opt-in laws, and things like that. But these kinds of things are happening around the world today. In terms of another way to think about maximizing the mobile experience, we talked about, instead of just thinking about the network as the mobile experience, think about the app. And so, for example, if you have a number of widely used applications, and I think this will be particularly relevant going forward as LTE gets more broadly deployed. And eventually, when you start looking at some of the capacity constraints that we've been talking about here today, one of the things that we believe will happen, which happened in the broadband world, is more segmentation and utilizing class of service as an example. And in this example, if you have an LTE network that's class of service enabled, and you happen to be monitoring the most commonly used video apps, for example, on your network, and you begin to notice through that monitoring in real time that customers are seeing suboptimal performance because the network delivery isn't really happening consistent with what the application needs. It gives you the opportunity to pop up, for example, and drive an offer to that subscriber that says, listen, if you want to use FaceTime on your 4G network and have superior HD quality of service, you might want to upgrade to a new class of service for another $10 a month, for example, right? And by doing that, again, you end up in a scenario where the customer has the opportunity to have an even more superior experience. The application supplier is able to save their brand, and you're able to make more money. So this is an example of thinking about these folks today that may be considered kind of competitors, all of a sudden thinking about how do you work together to provide a better experience and at the same time to find new sources of revenue for the operator. And that's the whole point of this chart, which is going forward, we think that the operator of the future, the survivors and the winners in the future from an operator perspective are going to be the ones that the orchestrators, the owners of this mobile experience. They're going to be the ones that pull together the application providers, the infrastructure providers, the other carriers, and collaborate to ensure that someone is being the steward of the mobile experience. And I would assert, having been in this industry now for 25 years, that's really the role the mobile operator has played, working on making sure that the devices are interoperable, that they're simple, and that they work. And going forward, to do that, we're going to have to raise the bar because it has to work at the application level. It has to work everywhere in the world, and it has to work in real time. That's what our customers want. And lastly, I'll just give you a view in terms of how we can help you do that. One of the things that Syniverse has tried to do over the years is certainly serve operators. And so today we serve about 1,000 operators around the world. We serve the vast majority of operators here in this room today within the CCA. But in addition, over the last 5 or 6 years, what we have done is start pulling together a hub of sorts for enterprises. So we now support more than 500 enterprises around the globe, multinational corporations, 8 of the top 10 US banks, major financial institutions around the world, airlines, logistics companies. And what we're able to do then is bring those entities together to try to create value and bring some of the things that we're talking about here to life, and to do that today. So for example, we've pioneered over the last 5 years a platform for real-time intelligence. That platform is deployed now in about 131 operators around the globe, supporting billions of subscribers. And that real-time intelligence network does some of the things I was talking about earlier. The customers that are using that platform, their customers never get bill shock, right? The ones that are using it those customers don't lose money because their subscribers can't roam, right? They don't lose customers because network performance problems go unnoticed, and we end up in a situation where the customer has to either get onto the phone, sit on the VRU forever, or go through the web channel and try to hope for a return email. Instead, they get a notice saying, hey, listen, we see you've been having some problems. Want you to let you know we've diagnosed that and repaired it, and you should be seeing superior service now, and if you're not, let us know, okay? Those kinds of capabilities. So the whole point is, going forward, we think it is time for operators to really rethink the paradigm, and that there's plenty of opportunity. This whole notion of dumb pipe, in our opinion, is a load of crap. There's an opportunity to not only continue to serve your customers well, but we think there's an opportunity for operators to grow and actually continue to stay at the forefront of the mobile experience. But in order to do that, I think it's really critical that you start rethinking how you look at your data and how you use that data. And you're going to have to utilize the infrastructure and the new technologies, just like we're doing on the network side, in the back office side, to make sure that you can keep up and stay out ahead of your customer. And that's one of the things that we think Syniverse can help you do. So thank you very much for your time, and have a great rest of the conference. Appreciate it.
All right, I think that changes. Thank you, Jeff. You know, it's always difficult trying to figure out where your customers are going to go, what demands they're going to have, and we really appreciate your insight into what is the next great demand that the consumer is going to impose on our carriers. So thank you, and also thank you for your Pinnacle sponsorship of CCA. Now, let's move to the Annual Achievement Awards. Each year, CCA recognizes outstanding members in 5 categories who have made significant